Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session today on the need for conflict coaching in an adversarial world. Dr. Winston,
Yes, Kavita.
we're live now, sir. You're good to go.
Thank you, Kavita. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and the Gen Z. Wonderful to come to our final day of our ICF Conclave 2021. I've got two wonderful people here with me today, Dr. Samantha Hardy and Joel Lee, and I'd like to introduce them to you today. Dr. Samantha Hardy is a certified mediator, narrative coach, and founder of Real Conflict Coaching System. In 2021, Sam was awarded the Australian Resolution Institute Award for Service to Dispute Resolution for her leadership and innovation. She has a PhD in law and conflict resolution, as well as other postgraduate qualifications in adult education. Sam is a well-known trainer and university educator, holding adjunct appointments in a number of universities in Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, and the USA. Sam has also published widely in conflict resolution, including her new book, Conflict Coaching Fundamentals: Working with Conflict Stories. There we go for Dr. Samantha Hardy. Welcome to the conflict.
Thank you very much, Dr. Winston.
You're welcome. Dr. Joel Lee is a professor at the Faculty of Law, the National University of Singapore. Joel co-pioneered the teaching of negotiation and mediation in the Singapore universities and has played a significant role in furthering the development of mediation in Singapore, not just in education, but in practice. A graduate of Victoria University of Wellington and Harvard Law Schools. Joel is a partner with CMP Cambridge, USA, and a principal mediator with the Singapore Mediation Center. Joel was a member of the International Mediation Institute's Independent Standards Commission and Intellectual Task Force, and was also the key member of the Ministry of Law's Working Group on International Commercial Mediation. Joel is presently the founding chair of the board of Singapore International Mediation Institute. He is also a certified trainer and neuro-linguistic programming (NLP). Joel has taught overseas in the University of Copenhagen, Denmark, University of Law, Economics and Science of Aix-Marseille, and Anglia Law School, UK, and is the co-editor and co-author of the book An Asian Perspective of Mediation and the Singapore Mediation Handbook, and the general editor of the Asian Journal of Mediation. In 2021, Joel was awarded the Educator Award, which is the National University of Singapore's highest teaching award. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to present to you these two wonderful speakers, and I would like to invite them to start the discussion. Over to you, Dr. Samantha Hardy and Joel Lee.
Thank you very much, Dr. Winston, for that very kind introduction. And just coincidentally, I also do meditation, so it's not that far off. It's all good.
That's brilliant.
It's a pleasure to be here with Samantha today, and actually, Sam and I have had actually a discussion as to how best we were going to do this session, and we figured that we were just going to do sort of like have a conversation about conflict coaching in an adversarial world. And in the hopes that the sort of the to and fro, the back and forth of that conversation would give us all a lot of ideas and interesting things to think about. So rather than Samantha sort of doing a prepared speech and then I do a prepared speech, it would seem more fun, right? So I figured that's what we were going to do, and I'll shut up in a moment. But I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember someone called Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson was a very, very famous sort of talk show host. He was on the Tonight Show. Now today you would, I think, recognize people like Jimmy Fallon and all that who are on that. So today I'm channeling Johnny Carson. I have less hair than Johnny Carson. I'm sorry, but oh well, life happens. And I'll leave Sam to tell her who she's channeling in this conversation. Sam, over to you.
Yes, I'm going to be Barbara Walters to Joel's Johnny Carson. So we're going to run a bit of a talk show type approach to conflict in an adversarial world. Hopefully we won't demonstrate too much adversarialness between the two of us. I think we're pretty good at collaboration these days. But I'm really excited to work with Joel. Joel and I have met each other quite a few times and we're always entertained by working together. So we hope you have as much fun as we both will in this session.
Yeah, and you know, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, you say it.
No, I was saying, if you guys are not going to have any fun, I'm sorry, we are. All right, so you might join us. Join us. Yeah. No conflict there.
And as you know already from our backgrounds, Joel and I are specialists in conflict. Conflict is our bread and butter. It's what we research, it's what we teach, and it's what we help people manage and resolve. So we're going to come at this to start with from a conflict resolution type perspective, but then we're going to shift into the connection between conflict and coaching. So to start off with, Joel, I thought might be useful. I mean, everyone knows what conflict is, right? We all know it. We've all experienced it in our lives. But I wonder if you could give us some sort of structure around the different components of conflict and what gives rise to it and why we tend to be so adversarial.
Sure. So I think one of the things about conflict is that it's got a bad reputation, right? Everybody thinks conflict is bad. But actually, if you think about it, conflict is a natural part of life. It has to be, right? So for example, our muscles move because they are antagonistic. They have to conflict with one another in order for us to keep our balance and to do things. In nature, a tree grows because different sides of the tree conflict with one another as it grows, and that's why it moves upwards. So conflict itself is not the bad thing, from my perspective. It's actually how we manage conflict or how we don't manage conflict. In other words, we're not really good at it. That causes us to have a very negative feeling towards conflict, right? So we think of conflict, we go, oh, I really don't want to do that. I don't like that idea. But fundamentally, conflict is natural, and in fact, it's actually a lot of how we grow. And Sam, you and I could have a conversation. We could be actually arguing about something. We could be having a conflict, but that conflict does not have to be destructive. That conflict can be entirely constructive conflict, right? I think that's one of the key points I want to sort of make as a difference. Now, in terms of the causes, and I'll shut up after this particular point, but there are many causes for why a conflict can occur, right? It could be because Samantha and I might want different things, or we might attribute different values to the same thing, or we might have a different mindset, or simply our personalities clash. Right? So there are a number of different things that can lead to conflict, and as I said, talking about it in a constructive way can be very productive. Especially, say, for example, if Sam and I are in a relationship, we have a conflict. We're not, but let's just say she just looks a bit worried. I figured I needed to. Yeah, exactly. So, no, never with you, crazy man. But the point here is that in order for our relationship to be stronger, we need to talk through what those differences, right, and to find some way to get some kind of a consensus agreement, work some of those differences through. So conflict is not bad, and one of the things that make conflict difficult for us is actually the mindset that we bring to the problem, right? If we see things with sort of like an adversarial mindset, or what we call sometimes a scarcity mindset, I think we tend to then fight, right? And in fact, if with Sam's permission, if I might just show you all a video, and the reason why I'm so excited about showing this video is I actually got a couple of people to do this video for me. I know you can now see my screen, and it's all a little bit strange, but if I now can show you this video here, I'll give you a little bit of background about who these two gentlemen are, but I assume you can all see my video. Sam, can you see this? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So this is a very short clip. I just want you to watch these two guys doing this thing. Right, and it's essentially one of the things that I just wanted to illustrate from that, and I'm sure you've seen that, in trainings or even in real life, that when people are faced with conflict, they tend to push back, right? And it's a very natural response as part of our amygdala, sort of the reptilian part of our brain, where we actually want to fight back, we want to maintain our balance, so we push back. But the problem is, you see those two people didn't get very far, right? They're both expanding a lot of energy, but they haven't achieved very, very much. right? And actually, there's a story to that video, but I'll share it for later. So anyway, Sam, that's at least some of my very quick views about what conflict is and the mindset. There are many things that cause the mindset, but I don't want to sort of go there for the moment. Let me sort of ask you a question then, because I'm feeling a little bit of sort of what they call an imposter syndrome, so I clearly admit my lack of expertise when it comes to conflict coaching. I'm a mediator by profession. I'm a trainer of mediators. But in a sense, conflict coaching isn't exactly the same as mediation, right?
No.
And there's similarities, I think, but it's actually quite different. If you had to educate me about what conflict coaching was and how it's different, what would you say? How would you help me understand this creature?
Sure. So I think one of the things about conflict coaching, I mean, an obvious difference between conflict coaching and mediation is in conflict coaching, or sometimes we call it conflict management coaching, to make it sound less like we're sort of a boxing coach, to emphasize that we're coaching for the purpose of helping people manage conflict better and perhaps resolve it, not to get into conflict in a negative kind of way. But the idea is that we help an individual to think differently about their conflict, to pay attention to things that they maybe haven't been paying attention to for various reasons, and then to highlight what choices they may have available to them in terms of how they respond to the other person, how they manage this conflict right now, looking for opportunities to resolve it. But also, I think one of the things that conflict coaching adds value, maybe in some ways above what happens in mediation, it's not just about managing the actual conflict in the moment. That's definitely part of it, but it's also a capacity building exercise. So in the process of coaching, what people learn is how to think about and manage and hopefully resolve conflict better in the future. So they will definitely improve their capacity to manage the conflict they're dealing with right now. But it can also be like a professional development opportunity to improve their confidence and their skills to manage and prevent unnecessary conflict in the future. So I think that's one of the things that I really like about it. It's not just let's resolve this particular problem and then all move on. It's let's do a little bit more than that. Let's change our mindset, as we talked about. Let's develop a better mindset towards conflict so we don't immediately think, oh, conflict's a bad thing, I better avoid it, I better avoid the other person at all costs, or I push back. And I think that's one of the things that we've talked about before, I know, Joel, that often our instinctive response to conflict is to push back or to avoid it. And neither of those things is usually the best way to manage it. Do you agree, Joel?
Sorry, let me unmute myself. Yes, absolutely. And what was interesting as you were saying all of that is that I think we share the same goals, right? We share the goals of saying we want to find some way to resolve the conflict, to resolve it in a very productive and constructive sort of way. In mediation, of course, the difference is that I'm the mediator and I'm guiding parties through a process. I'm not really sort of coaching them, even though sometimes in a private session we might provide a little bit of coaching. The way you apologize is this way, or the way you make an offer is this way. You might want to try this rather than, I'm sorry. No, and then nobody believes you, right? But yours seems to go for far more sort of long-term, enabling systemic change, right? It sounds a little bit almost like therapy. I know it's not therapy. I know it's not, but it seems to me that you're trying to engender a little bit more of a long-term change. Is sort of my understanding correct? Is that right?
Yes, although, I mean, it does have some similarities with therapy, and in some ways, if you watch some of the interactions a coach might have with a client, they might do similar kinds of things in asking questions, helping people turn negative thoughts into more constructive, positive thoughts. Conflict coaching, though, in my mind, is a fairly short-term intervention. It's not meant to be like a therapeutic relationship where you meet every week for 10 years. It's meant to be a fairly short-term thing, so that we emphasize the client's capacity to be empowered and to be independent and be able to manage conflict themselves. So I guess in a way, for a mediator, you're facilitating parties to reach an agreement. So you're doing it with them in a way, having them both in the room. And I guess in conflict coaching, more what I'm doing is I'm supporting the person to go and do it themselves. So I'm preparing them to try at least to do it themselves. They may decide that mediation is what they need, in which case I can prepare them to go into mediation ready with the right mindset, with ideas about how to express themselves. And mediators love it when they get a client who's been through conflict coaching first, because they're already in the right mindset. They've already come with ideas. They're ready to listen. They're ready to share information. They've got ideas about choices for the future. So I think in a way, a coach can help prepare people for mediation, but sometimes people realize, actually, I think I can do this without a mediator. I can probably do this myself. Now I've talked it through. I've had a few practice runs. I've got a few ideas. I might try and go and talk to them myself. So it can save that sort of process. So you can use it as a preparation for another process. You can use it as a preparation for a do-it-yourself approach. You can also use it afterwards as a follow-up. So one of the things that often happens in mediation, people reach an agreement, and in the mediation room, it all sounds great. Everybody's talked it through. They've got a nice written summary of who's going to do what. But you go back into the real world and things don't quite go to plan. Other people get involved, and it's a little bit hard to implement sometimes what seemed perfect in the mediation room. And coaching can be used also as a way to help people implement their agreements, to try and keep it on track so that it doesn't all fall down or they don't have to go back to mediation. So it's really interesting the way you can use it before, after, instead of other conflict resolution type processes.
Right. No, that is interesting to me, because it seems to me that I can thank you for two things, right? If your clients come to me in the context of a mediation, I'd say excellent, because you've had the ground prepared, and so you make my job easier. But as a mediator, one of the things that I would love, because I specialize in negotiation as well, one of the things I would love is to put myself out of a job. Because if I don't actually have to mediate disputes, it basically means that people are learning to resolve their own disputes in a positive sort of way. So either way, a lot to thank you for. And I'm just noticing that there is actually a question right now that might just sort of fit in with what we're talking about. And the question is from Anuradha, is what are the similarities and differences between coaching and conflict management coaching? I'm going to look to your expertise for this, but Sam, if you could address Anuradha's question.
So between coaching, sorry, I didn't see that one. There's so many things going in the.
Yeah, it's under Q&A. It's under Q&A. Yeah.
Coaching. Okay. So from my perspective, the conflict management coaching is sort of a subset of coaching. So I think to do conflict management coaching well, you need two things. You need a very strong background in coaching. You need to understand the role of the coach, how you build a relationship with a client as a coach. You need to understand some of the all of the ethical requirements, not just some of them. So you need to have a very strong understanding of what coaching is compared to other sort of relationships or processes you might use. And you also need a really good understanding of conflict dynamics. You need to understand how people typically behave when they're in conflict and they're not managing it well. You need to understand the sorts of questions that would support a client to shift their mindset from an adversarial mindset into a more collaborative approach. So I think what it does is it combines expertise in conflict management and conflict resolution with expertise in coaching, and it means that you can support a client in conflict at a slightly higher level. If you're a really good coach, if you're a really good executive coach or even a life coach, I'm sure you deal with clients in conflict, and I'm sure in the course of that work, you can really support them to manage it better. Having that extra bit of training and expertise in conflict dynamics, conflict management, resolution processes, and understanding how people behave just takes that to a different level. It gives you some sort of artistry level questions and approaches to support the client through that. So that's my explanation for the difference. It's sort of a subset more than a different thing.
Nice. And I do a little sort of as a result of my misspent youth in the field called neurolinguistic programming. I do a little bit of brief therapy, so I can see some of the similarities. As I said, I do understand it's not exactly the same. Actually, some of what you're saying right now triggers in my memory a movement that was in the 80s, maybe even late 80s, called what we call transformative mediation, right? So as those of us who are familiar with mediation, generally, people fall into various camps, but one camp is what we call the facilitative interest-based model, comes out of Harvard. Then there's the other one is, just let's not waste time and let's settle. That's sort of like the settlement orientated sort of rights based of evaluative sort of mode. But actually, in the early 80s and mid 80s, there are these two gentlemen in California, had to be California, of course, who basically said that they felt mediation had lost its way, and that the mediation was just too lost in just settlements, efficiency, and not fulfilling the initial values of mediation, which is actually recognition and empowerment, and recognition of each other's sort of value, each other's stories, as it were, and empowerment of ourselves to be able to ask and have those difficult conversations, right? And it seems to me that conflict coaching is exactly addressing those points, right? I mean, I could be mistaken, but yeah.
Absolutely. And I should actually say at this point, that's a very pertinent observation. I'm actually a certified transformative mediator, so I've done their training and I'm certified. So I think what I do is heavily influenced by that. I think if the transformative people looked at my conflict coaching model, they wouldn't necessarily say it was transformative, but I think it is very informed by that sense of developing people's empowerment and recognition. Another thing that just occurred to me as we were speaking, Joel, is another difference between the role of a mediator or a third party who's working with both parties and a conflict coach. So in my conflict coach work, I prefer to only work with one of the parties, not both of them. And for me, that builds a different level of trust and a different kind of relationship with the client that allows them to be more open and to respond to maybe some more challenging questions from me than if I'm in an impartial role where I have to talk to both parties. So it makes people feel an extra layer of confidence and trust when they feel like I am on their side. I'm not going to do the work for them. I'm not going to tell them what to do, but I am there to support them to figure out what's going to work best for them and take into consideration other people's perspectives and needs. And I think that allows you to take people's mindset a little bit further than maybe is always possible when you're a neutral or an impartial third party, where you have to be very careful about not sounding like you're on someone's side. So I really love that role and that differentiation between the work I do as a mediator and when I'm sort of on someone's side and really backing them,
Absolutely. You're in their corner, right? I mean, I know that metaphor comes from boxing, and we don't want to talk about boxing because it's there. But it's you're in their corner. You're right. You're on their side. You're helping them prepare for that particular interaction. And I think that's great. And in fact, one of the questions I'd be very curious to ask you about is whether in conflict coaching you sort of do things like visualization. So what I mean by that is sometimes in order for me to help somebody prepare for an interaction with somebody else, right? A parent, a partner, whatever. I sometimes get them to actually do mental rehearsal, visualize it, edit the movie that's in their head and all that. Is that something of what conflict coaching does?
Absolutely. There's definitely space for that in what we would do in a conflict coaching session. So my model, which is the real conflict coaching system, is based on the idea that we get ourselves in a particular story when we're in conflict. And I describe it as a melodramatic story where the person feels like they're the innocent victim, they're helpless and stuck, and this bad guy's come along, done all these terrible things that's made them suffer, that's unfair and unjust. And the outcome they want is someone to sort of rescue them, get rid of this bad guy, show the world that it was really unfair and put them back where they should be. And, when I explain that in a very superficial way, you can kind of recognize what happens in the legal system. You have to show that you haven't contributed to the suffering, that the other person's to blame. Blame's such a big part of melodrama. And somebody in power, the judge, says, okay, yep, you were right, you were wrong, give them money, they'll be back as if it never happened. But in reality, there's so many problems with that. Joel, I know you would agree, there's so many problems. So partly what I help people do is recognize that story they're telling themselves isn't realistic. It makes us feel good if we're the innocent victim of some other bad guy's actions, but it's not actually helpful in terms of managing the conflict. So I help them explore that story by asking a lot of questions, going over it in more detail, getting specific examples, inviting them to describe what happened from other people's perspectives. And then when we move to the future focus part of the session, we often include rehearsals to build their confidence. So I'd say, okay, so you've said that you think maybe you should have a conversation with them. Imagine I'm them. Come and try that with me. So they have a try and we say, okay, what do you think how would they react to that? And what would be best case, worst case? Try it a different way. Say what you really want to think if there are no consequences. People love it when you give them permission to do that.
That's
behave
right.
really, really badly. Like, just let it all out. And then
I wish my wife would give me that permission, but it never happens. Never happens.
Yeah. So we do a lot of rehearsal, role playing, testing things out. And that's important so people can kind of hear how it might sound and see if they feel comfortable with it. But it also often, as they do it, they recognize, oh, actually, that's probably not the best way to say it. So they also self-correct as they have the opportunity to try it in a safe environment.
No, I think that's great, because a lot of what happens in our mental rehearsal, I mean, if you actually are into sports psychology as well, they say that actually when you rehearse a sports move, and professional sports people do this, right? You visualize the perfect swing, and it is almost as if you were doing it yourself. It has the same or very similar benefits, right? And there's no reason why we can't do it with sort of mental skills as well as behavioral skills.
And I think, as you were saying before about building up your muscles, as we mentally rehearse better ways to manage conflict, we build those neural pathways, and it starts to become natural to people. They become more confident in managing conflict and not reacting to it based on an instantaneous emotional response. They build a repertoire of new responses that they can take with them into all sorts of different future situations.
Right. So then they will have choice, and it sort of generalizes into other contexts, which is really nice. I want to pick up on one thing that you had said, and actually it corresponds to some of the questions that have actually appeared on the feed. I'm afraid I apologize to our friends out there. If you see me looking away, I'm actually looking at the Q&A. So it's not that I'm not paying attention to Sam. It's just I'm trying to do a couple of things at the same, actually 3 things at the same time. One is I'm trying not to fall over. So the one thing I want to follow up on is the notion of stories, right? I mean, I like the idea of saying the stories that we tell each ourselves, because, I mean, honestly, we are always either the hero in our own story or the victim in our own story, right? We're never the evil bad guy. We're never the villain, right? Okay. And I sometimes in a class or a training course, I'll say to people, right? Okay, how many of you are the unreasonable ass, right? And no one puts up their hands unless they are an unreasonable ass, and they'll put up their hands with very, very little. But what's interesting to me is that there is some suggestion in neuroscience and in psychology that actually our brain operates metaphorically. The only way that we make sense of the world is through the metaphors, the operating metaphors, the similes, the narratives, the stories we tell ourselves and that we present to the external world, right? And as you said, we are either the hero or the villain. That gives rise to that mindset that we talked a little bit about earlier, right? The adversarial mindset. And the unfortunate thing is the adversarial mindset seems to be very, very prevalent. Somehow we've all bought into this idea that we have a problem, we go to court. We have a problem, we need to look at who's our rights, have our rights been breached, and so on and so forth, right? If someone pushes us, we have to push back. And to be frank, it's really not our fault. It just comes from if you pardon the Western sort of the value that a lot of Western societies place on what they call competition, right? A free enterprise, right? Capitalism, which all is, there's all underlyingness of it, which is competition. Right? Somehow we must compete to get ahead in the world. And that gives us a lot of sort of these sort of mindset. So it's inherent even in the language we use, right? When I teach in law school, and of course you too, you hear this a lot. People say, "Oh, we need to find the arguments to shoot down their points," right? We need to build a good defense to our case, and all these are the metaphors of war, right? Sometimes people tell me that negotiation is like it's like playing poker. Right? When you tell me it's like playing poker, that metaphor tells me that you're going to lie, you're going to bluff, right? And more importantly, as a game, it's win-lose. Someone's going to lose. Anytime there's a game, it's going to be win-lose. It's the media, right? Series like Suits. Those of us who are familiar with Suits or Boston Legal, any of the exciting, popular law films, it's really all about how people are competing one another, out-strategizing one another, right? I remember, Sam, you and I were talking before, and I was saying that there will never be a popular series on mediation. And I think they attempted to be one. I think it lasted for one season. Nobody really liked it because there wasn't enough conflict and there wasn't enough sort of bullshit and all of that, right? And so the notion of television modeling for us positive ways of responding to conflict actually isn't there because it doesn't sell. It's not exciting. It's not sexy. It's not something that people want to watch, right? And so that's what we're fighting against. We're fighting against sort of this mindset that essentially comes from popular media, from the notion of games. And actually, we think about it for a moment. If I could just very quickly now share a slightly different video. Again, I want to see if I can do this correctly. I believe we've got that right. And if everybody saw a very quick sort of snippet of this, everybody would recognize this as typical arm wrestling, right? As typical arm wrestling. Arm wrestling's a game. The whole notion of arm wrestling is to try to push the other guy's hands down, and you win. You get a point, or if you count it by points, right? And we sometimes illustrate this in people, so people can say, oh, we can negotiate win-win and all that. Then we get them to play this game, and they end up going back to that competition. The mindset has not shifted, because inherent in games is an assumption of competition and win-lose. But what if we could implant different values, different assumptions within these games? So, for example, what if these guys playing arm wrestling did this instead? Now, this is not new, of course. This is I'm sure people have seen this before. But the fact that you can actually take what is traditionally a win-lose competitive game and just say, well, hang on, let's say we play this collaboratively. How do we do that, right? Because it really isn't the nature of the game or the nature of the interaction. It's the mind that we bring to it, right? And so I think that the key question then is how do we get people to see that we're interconnected, and how do we begin to shift some of those mindsets, right? Yeah.
And I think, Joe, you spoke a lot about popular television shows, and I think in some ways this adversarial mindset comes from what we're taught as children. You know, if you think of children's television shows and children's storybooks, it's always really obvious who's good and who's bad. And the moral of the story is always, if you're good, if you're a nice person and you do the right thing, it'll all work out for you in the end. And that's a really great thing to teach kids and adults, right? Try and be as good as you can. But unfortunately, in the real world, it's not always fair, and sometimes even being a good person doesn't mean you get what you want. And also the problem with that sort of dual role approach to things is that you have to cast the other person as the bad person. There's no room for that person's a good person doing the best they can as well. And there are a whole lot of reasons why we disagree and why we're in conflict. Maybe we could talk about those things and learn about them. If we cast them as the bad guy, then we're discouraged from having a conversation with them, because why would you sit down and talk to some bad guy? So I think part of it is that the intention of that sort of mindset is to teach us to try and be good, to teach us that if we're nice and we do the right thing, the world will be a better place. The problem is it creates a dichotomy where the other person has to be the bad guy. And I think the other thing is when we're in conflict and we're not managing it well, we become like children again. We have our childish tantrums, right? So we revert back into that childish, I did my best, this is not fair, that person, you're mean to me, you're horrible. And we become like...
Take that back, Samantha, take that back.
That's right. No, what I said, no you, no me, no you. Yeah, we become ridiculous. And I think we need to develop capacity to think beyond the simple. And one of the things that I talk about actually in my book is that a really important shift for someone to make from an adversarial mindset to a more constructive mindset is to move away from the simple to the complex, to recognize that it's never just I'm good, they're bad, and we just carve up the outcome.
Yeah.
Or someone wins and someone loses. There's always a lot more going on. And when we unpack it, we learn a lot about ourselves, we learn a lot about other people, and we learn that we actually are interconnected. If there was no connection between us, we wouldn't have any conflict, because it wouldn't matter to me what you were doing. It's actually our connectedness that often creates an opportunity for conflict. And unfortunately, our typical response is to disconnect further, when what we need to do is learn to communicate through the challenges in our connection, so that we can make it a constructive working relationship in the future. Or even if we are going to separate, say we're parents separating permanently, we can do it in a constructive way that doesn't create damage to children or ourselves and our ex-partner in the process.
Yeah, no, but I'm getting excited now. So B1, I'm getting excited now. I'm gonna get a little bit esoteric right now. So I mean, I like what you said, in the sense that that if there's a good person, there must be a bad person, right? I mean, that's the notion of the duality of things, and that comes, but also within sort of Western philosophical thought, right? I think it's Aristotle, damn him, the notion of the either or, right? There is the exclusive or. You're either this or that, right? Never mind the platypus sort of messes that up for us, but that's okay, right? It's either or. And it really does lead to a separation, right? The idea that you are you and I'm me, and your problems are not my problem, and we're somehow separate, right? And I don't know whether it's politically correct to talk about religion. I was brought up as a Christian. I am no longer a practicing Christian, but the idea, even in many religious teachings around the world, is that sort of the message of loving and caring, right? My neighbor, the speck in your eye, in your brother's eye, is a speck in my eye, and so on and so forth. But one of the things I've always found far more interesting in terms of this notion of interconnectedness, and this is where it gets a little bit funky, is the notion of actually why do we think we're actually separate, right? So from I love Zen stories. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Zen stories, but I love Zen stories. One of the Zen stories I love to hear is the big wave doesn't look at the small wave and say you're a small wave. Neither does the small wave be envious of the big wave. They're waves. They're all part of the greater sea, right? And for us, humankind, it seems to me like we all came from a similar place, whether you want to call it heaven or the energy or the universe. And currently, I am the water in a big jug or big reservoir, but I'm poured into this shaped cup called Joel. And Samantha is poured into another shaped vessel called Samantha, and we're all in different cups. But actually, we all go back and derive from the same source, right? And so it seems to me that this separateness is an illusion. And I know it sounds a little bit esoteric. I know, for example, that the Hawaiians, even the Chinese, will believe that there is actually an energetic connection between people. All right, and when I train neuro-linguistic programming, for example, I get people to be in peripheral vision. So, and it's very, very strange, because actually when we do rapport building exercises, after a while you actually don't remember who's who. You sort of feel such a connection, such a rapport with the other person, that you suddenly go, okay, we're kind of thinking similar things. It's all good. It's kind of fun, right? Now, I'm not saying this to sort of say we should all, we're all sort of the same. We're not. But I think we are far more interconnected than people give us, or people may think, right? And it's sometimes trying to sort of shift them into that interconnection. One of the stories that I'll tell, and I'll shut up after this story, is the story of what they call the allegory of the spoons, right? And so this man passes on, and sort of the guides basically say, oh, okay, well, we'll give you a choice, because you kind of led a good life and not so good life. So we give you a choice. Do you want to go to heaven or do you want to go to hell? And so he says, I'd like to take a tour, please, because I suppose you can tour these things. So the angel takes him to hell, and he sees the most horrible thing, right? He sees all these people seated around a bowl of food, but they're withered, they're hungry, they're starving, they can't eat, because the spoon that they have is a long spoon. It's super long, so they can't actually bring the spoon to their mouth. They can't eat, and the hell for them was just being able to starve when there was plenty of food. And he says, "This is horrible. I don't want this." And so the angel's going, "Let me take you to heaven." And he takes him to heaven. And as he walks into heaven, he sees the same thing. There are all these people around this big bowl with these long spoons. And he said, "Hang on, did we go to the wrong place?" And the angel says, no, look at them. These guys are well fed. And the only difference is that the people in heaven learn to feed one another, right? And it's just, a funky story to tell, because it just illustrates that we sometimes can do a heck of a lot more if we actually saw ourselves as part of an interconnected whole, right? Maybe even better for the planet, right? But
that's an awesome story.
Please, yeah. So anyway, I think maybe we should look at some of these questions.
I was just about to say exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
You see, rapport, interconnectedness.
I didn't want to disturb you, but to the participants, I'd like to thank you for the questions that are coming in. Due to lack of time, we will not be able to answer all the questions, but some of the questions that are of importance and relevant, maybe I'll leave it to Dr. Samantha and Joel to have a look through and maybe address them. I've got a few questions too.
If there are questions that people don't have answered or we don't have time for, I'm more than happy for people to email me with questions, and Joel as well. So if you don't get your question answered, please feel free to contact us by email and we can answer you directly.
That'll be wonderful. Thank you very much. I've got some questions to you both.
Sure.
The first one is it always possible to change a person's mindset from adversarial to collaborative?
Should we do 3 minutes each, Joel?
Sure, you go ahead. I'm trying to figure out.
I think it is almost always possible to help people shift somewhat towards the collaborative mindset. And I think, there's always going to be a small percentage of people who, for whatever reason, whether it's their personality or their other incentives, don't want to make that shift. But I think given the right opportunity and the right environment where they feel like you are there for them, not for some ulterior reason, most people can shift towards a collaborative approach. We may not, turn them into warm, fuzzy people who feed other people instantaneously, but I think we can almost always help them improve. Joel?
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree, and sometimes it's not a full shift that you're looking for. You're sort of moving in the correct direction, and sometimes, people might think being collaborative is really being selfless and being nice, and I don't think that's entirely accurate. I think for collaborative mindset, you should be self-interested. You shouldn't be doing this just out of the goodness of your heart. You should be self-interested, right? So one of the sayings that we are all familiar with is you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink, right? I think most of us will be familiar with that saying. Yeah. And so I think the question that's actually being asked is, what if the horse doesn't want to drink? And it's true, you cannot force the horse to drink. However, and this is sort of my addition to that proverb, is you can give the horse enough salt such that it will want to drink the water by itself. Right. So there is always a motivation. There's always something that is in their interest, but they just need to see it. They don't see it because the adversarial zero-sum scarcity mindset is a limited one. So they don't actually see that there's value in collaboration. And I, as a mediator, I try to show them that there's that value. I suspect Sam does exactly the same thing through conflict coaching.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, both of you. That's very interesting. My next question is, if you are collaborative, don't you stand to be taken advantage of by someone who is the adversarial?
Yeah, Sam, shall I just take that first and then I'll speak first? I just wanted to point out that there's somebody named Satya had asked a question. How does this point of view hold up with the Chris Voss never split the different school of thought that discourages compromise of any kind where no one really wins? Thank you. The magic people in the background that do these things, and so I just want to quickly address that, because I think this is pretty much also the same concern, right? I mean, if we're collaborative, then what if someone takes something? Again, I think a lot of the time people think that to be collaborative means to be nice. It doesn't have to be. I know some very, very good collaborative negotiators who are actually nasty people, but they have a collaborative mindset, right? And I know some people who are very, very competitive, but they are the nicest sharks you will ever meet. In fact, you won't see them stabbing you, and then after they stab you, you will thank them for stabbing you, right? So please don't assume that it's actually about being nice or not nice. Now, there's nothing wrong with being nice, okay? I like being nice. It's a good thing, right? But fundamentally, being collaborative is not about letting somebody take advantage of you. It's about actually pushing for what you want and what's important to you, as much as taking into account what the other person wants, right? So going back to the point about Chris Voss never split the difference, basically it's not compromise. We're not talking about compromise. We're talking about collaboration, right? And while I'm not going to suggest to you that in every instance, there can be a win-win, everybody can win, I think everybody can gain something, right? And a lot of people think win-win has to be 100%. I disagree, right? 50-50 is compromise, right? 30-70 is win-lose, because it's a clear split. But to be frank, 60-60 is also win-win. 60-70 is also win-win. It's more than 100%, which is the point that collaboration is basically saying. We can be stronger and meet both our interests as much more, in fact, better, if we collaborate. Okay. Sam,
and Joel, can I just add something to that? I think the point that you made, that Chris Voss definitely discourages compromise, and that's because compromise is usually people giving up something that's important to them for the sake of a resolution. And sometimes that's the best you can do. If that's the absolute best you can do, and you've put a lot of effort into trying to do something better than that, then you have a hard choice. Do you walk away, or do you make a compromise? But almost all of the time, with a little bit more effort, with a slightly different mindset, with some better communication, you can do better than a compromise. You might not get 100% of what you want, but you might get something different from just having to give up something for the sake of settling. And I think that's the distinction. We're talking about something more nuanced than that. Compromise is kind of an easy way out. It's, I don't want to put any more energy into this. It's better than keeping fighting, so I'll just let go of that, and at least we'll have an agreement.
Yep.
But you can usually do better than that if you have the time and the energy.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Satya, for that question. My next question to you both: what other things could help in addition to or instead of conflict coaching?
All sorts of things.
A nice glass of wine.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah, you have to be a little bit careful about alcohol, because if you have too much of it, it can make things
exactly.
worse.
It's true. Fair enough.
I mean, things that Joel talked about, I mean, something as simple as meditation, learning to regulate your own automatic responses, being more self-aware of the sorts of things that tend to trigger unhelpful behaviors for you in conflict. For some people it's a particular word, for some people it's a particular personality. The more you are self-aware of how you typically react and the pros and cons of your sort of typical reaction, the more you can tailor your response to something that you can perhaps choose between, create a little bit of space in the moment to say, I really want to fight back, but is this a moment where I should think of something else? And if you spend time reflecting on it, perhaps with a coach or perhaps on your own or with a loved one, you have a better repertoire and you have more control over your actions rather than being reactive. And a lot of the trouble we get ourselves into in conflict is because we react without really making a conscious choice to do what might be the best thing in the moment.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that, and I did promise to share a little bit of the background between those two videos that I showed you. So you saw that sort of this very strange, boards and all that. A part of what I do in my other life is I teach martial arts. I run a martial arts school, right? And a lot of people think, well, hang on, you teach conflict resolution and then you teach martial arts. That's kind of isn't that self-clash? And actually, the answer is no. Interestingly enough, all right. the more you are capable of in a martial art and that you are familiar with, and the more confident you are, the less likely you want to resolve something through violence. It's just one of those weird things, and it's actually a parallel that I've noticed in my life as a martial artist, but also as a negotiator mediator, and also as a trainer of negotiation mediation. Interestingly enough, I see the journey as when we start off, we're really learning the behaviors, we're really learning how to just say the right things, do listening, and all that. But it becomes a self-development journey, right? It is about self-mastery. And so sometimes when we say, you want to be a master of negotiation, you want to master conflict resolution, the thing that you have to master is not the other party. You actually have no real control over the other party. You're mastering yourself, right? It's not surprising, for example, that William Ury, who some of you might be familiar with, he was a co-author to Getting to Yes,
Yes.
and of the book Getting Past No. His later books have actually been titled Getting to Yes with Yourself, right? And it's sort of a recognition that actually, as we get more developed, we're actually looking inwards. It's about learning to control our sort of gut responses, be reflective upon, should I really be doing this? I mean, really want to shout at the person, but no, that's not necessarily the best thing, right? I'm not talking about enlightenment, but I'm just talking about we're just sort of getting there a little bit, right? So it seems very interesting that you brought it up, because I think it is really about inner sight and insight, yeah.
And a lot of what we do in our conflict coaching context is to help people reflect on their own experiences, to think about their own personal values, to think about their typical triggers in conflict situations, and to really go back to situations that have happened for them in the past involving conflict and really unpack them, really look at them more carefully, all the things that they're aware of that they haven't paid attention to, what happened in between and around the very important moments in their story. There's quite a few questions in the Q&A around how this might work in a workplace context as opposed to a personal or a family-related conflict. And I think the basic principles are the same. It's about getting people to understand the story that they're telling themselves, explore that story, find out what else is going on, what's the backstory, what's the contextual story, what's the history of that sort of the beliefs that are driving people's behaviors in that situation. And then get them to think about, if the story was told by the other people, whether it's a husband or a wife or a neighbour or a colleague, how might they describe what's been happening? So we also look at different people's version of the story, as much as we can imagine them from just our own perspective. And then we say, well, what would your preferred story look like if you walked out of here tomorrow? And let's be optimistic but still realistic. Let's not imagine that tomorrow the other person disappears in a puff of smoke and suddenly you're the CEO with $1 billion. Let's be realistic about what might be possible. Tell me the story of what would be different. So we get people to really explicitly describe what life would be like if the conflict was being managed well, and we ask them to do it in a lot of detail, not I'd feel happier going to work or things would be better at work. We want really specific examples. And then we move into the action planning stage where we'd say, okay, what's one thing to start with that you could do yourself that might make that more likely? So we start small, but we build on it. And we emphasize that right now, it's about what you can do, what you might be able to influence or motivate somebody else, but there's no guarantee that you can change someone else's behavior. So what do you have available to you? And just really quickly, Joel, and then I'll hand over to you. There's another question about what happens if you can't win? What happens if you have to sort of accept defeat? That's another thing that I see a lot. People get stuck in this, but I can't lose, it's not fair. And so they keep beating their head against a wall, trying to change something that maybe can't be changed, and maybe it is really unfair. But after we explore the reality of the situation, if that's it, there's no point still banging your head against the wall. All it's going to do is continue your suffering. Maybe what we have to do is say, okay, if you can't get in that direction, even though it's really unfair, what are your options? How are you going to grow and learn and rise from the ashes of this defeat? If you really can't do anything about it, let's face up to that reality and make choices to build your resilience moving on from this defeat or loss or, life sucks moment.
Yeah, that reminds me. I'm sorry, Dr. Rizal, that reminds me of this saying. It's attributed to Einstein. I'm not sure if in today's internet world, nobody knows where these things come from anyway. But it's basically saying in the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result, right? And sometimes it's just simply realizing that situation is not something that you have a heck of a lot of choice, and just doing the same thing, hitting your head against the wall doesn't work. And sometimes it's really about doing something else, doing anything else, right? And developing a certain flexibility in your behavior to actually take a step back, gain perspective, see the bigger picture, and say, okay, well, hang on, I can't get through this wall, but there's a door right there. Why don't I just open the door and walk through, right? And
are you sure that's a direction that was really the best way for you to go anyway? I mean, exactly. Maybe there's some other directions that are much, have much nicer views on the other side than that wall.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. And just one question I have. Can you just relate this to the chaos theory, the famous chaos theory, when we are thinking of this subject?
I can do that very quickly, in the sense that one of the things that we want to do in conflict is to make things feel certain. We want a coherent story. We want to know who's good, who's bad, what the right outcome is. We want to make certain a chaotic world. And that's what often gets us unstuck. Often what we have to do is recognize that it's a chaotic, uncertain world, and we're never going to have all the information. There's never going to be one absolutely right answer. And the best we can do is map out our path through the chaos and not unrealistically expect that we can sort it into nice, neat boxes, because the real world doesn't work like that. The adversarial system sells us a fiction that that's possible, but when we leave the courtroom and we go back into the messy real life, we realize that it's not actually resolved, and even though the court says it's now over, it still feels messy and chaotic and uncomfortable. So it's about us being comfortable with chaos and uncertainty. That's also one of the key tools and skills of being able to manage conflict constructively.
Yeah, I'm going to go in with a slightly different slant on this, because I think, Dr. Winston, you could also be talking about chaos theory as in the flapping of a butterfly's wings, right?
Yeah.
That can cause a hurricane around halfway around the world, right?
That's right.
But the whole notion of chaos theory is exactly the interconnectedness, the systems of everything, not just between human beings, not between a butterfly and a weather pattern, but the planet. Right. If we really take a holistic view about that, and really this is a key thing, if we continue the way we're going to continue, the planet's dying. Right. It's the only one we've got. It's the only planet in the universe that has chocolate. Just think about it that way. If you love chocolate, we need to save the planet. Right. So the interconnectedness from chaos theory is exactly that. Yeah. Yes, the world descends into chaos. That is there's a technical entropy. I think is a technical term for that. But bottom line is we're interconnected, and if we don't realize that, we're doomed, and we need to very quickly realize that and advance.
And I think it's also a really nice, that butterfly flaps its wings and it has a ripple effect, is a really good selling point for coaching. Even though I might only work with one person involved in the conflict, I might never see the other person, and I might never mediate a conversation. If I can help that person shift their mindset in a slightly more collaborative way, if I can give them confidence to go in and approach the situation differently, that small change by one person, could eventually lead to world peace.
Well,
one hopes.
Samantha and Joel, I think you both have really brought clarity to our subject, and a very, very interesting session this morning. Thanks so very much for you having taken the time to come and be with us. We did have a conflict before we started, but it was resolved, and thanks very much for your patience, and the smile on your face is really beautiful. Thank you very much, and we invite you to come to our final session this afternoon when we have the final closing ceremony. Please do come. We have a kind invitation to you both. And to all the participants, thank you very much for your patience and for the nice questions that have come up. Please be assured that it will all be addressed. And I'd like to thank the wonderful team of ICF for all the good work that they have put in to make this a successful conclave conference. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much for
Dr.
having us.
Vincent.
You're welcome.
And thank you for everyone. And feel free to get in touch with Joel or I if you have any questions. I know there were many that weren't answered because of the short time. So please do, I encourage you to get in touch and ask those questions of us directly.
Thank you. Kavita has got something to say.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you, Dr. Samantha. Really, it was an engrossing conversation. I have a lot of questions, and I'm sure I'm going to be reaching out to you separately. And really interesting and engrossing conversation. And it was so the way it was weaved from one question to another. It was really, really, very nicely done. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everyone.